Glad you guys are back.
Thanks.
Have a good one. You got about a minute.
Okay, this is stage 2, Icicle Brook North. It is 15.9 miles.
Thank you. Seatbelt and helmet are tight. Alright,
Yep.
there are 2 cars off. One is at least mile 9, and the other one is mile 14. Both triangles, both are okay. Don't know if they're on the left or right.
Got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. G9. We are armed. 15 seconds. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! 150. Stay right over crest into left 5 minus over crest. 100. Right 5 long. Into crest. Into left 5 minus long over crest. Open over crest. Into long crest, 70. Right 5 plus over long crest. Left 5 plus long. Into small crest, 250. Right 3 no cut. Into left 4 minus no cut, long.
take? Right there?
Got Porsche, yep.
Okay, cool.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Don't go yet. 4. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.